Play viewers, thanks for being here. My name is Julia Christina and I'm a therapist. And before we get started, as people are coming in, I have to tell you guys a story of something that just happened to me. So I was out for, and hi Jess. Oh my gosh, Jess, I just saw your comment. Haven't had a chance to reply back in the Facebook group, but you are hilarious. Hi Miss Jess, thank you for being here. Thank you guys so much for showing up. But before we get started, hi Jessica, another wonderful Jess in here, and another Jess. Oh my gosh, seriously, I am being bombarded with all of my favorite people right now, and they all happen to be called Jess. So I was just out, just before we get into this, I have to tell you guys that, and my favorite Harper is here too. My Jesses are here. So I was just out for a run, and the crappiest thing just happened, and a crow dive bombed me. And as I was running along, all of a sudden I just felt this like bonk on my head, and it was a crow that put its feet down on my head, and it was such a gross feeling. And the crappy thing is, the crazy thing, that's the third time that it has happened to me. Not this year, it happened twice last year. I know, it's amazing, right? It's so disturbing. You're just going along, doing your thing, and all of a sudden something bonks you on the head, and it's a crow. What? I know, it's right, Martha? It's hilarious, but also mildly disturbing, and it freaks me out. So now I'm gonna have to start wearing a hat now in the spring because they're nesting and they get protective, and I guess my hair looks like some kind of nest or something that they feel that it's okay to, maybe they think that they're gonna get something from it to bring to their nest. I don't know. No, it just bonked down on my head. It just like the talons just like bonked on my head and then it flew off. I know, it's gross. It's gross. I don't like it. Yeah. Okay, a lot of people have some good bird stories. We're going to have a whole other scope. Tell me your worst, most disturbing bird story, because it sounds like there's a few of them. But let's get started. Let's talk about boundaries and 3 crappy things that come from having boundaries. Because, let's be honest, there are a helmet, right? I'm going to have to start wearing a helmet, not just a hat, but a helmet. Because, you know, we talk a lot about boundaries, and I talk a lot about boundaries and talk about how great boundaries are and how important they are. But what we sometimes don't look at is the fact that sometimes it can be crappy to have boundaries. And we're going to go through this and talk about it. I'm going to talk, a lot of my boundary setting graduates are here right now. And so a lot of this information is not going to be brand new to you guys. Yeah, you've heard about boundaries, right, Jess? So let's talk about these 3 ones. So the first one, the first crappy thing that happens when we start to set boundaries, when we start to say, this works for me, this doesn't work for me, I'm not okay with that, when we start to speak up and actually start showing up more in our relationships and saying what makes sense for us and using our no, there's backlash. There can definitely be backlash. And those of you guys who have ever gone from not really having boundaries to starting setting boundaries, yeah, Sarah, is lots of backlash, lots of guilt. A lot of people don't like it when they're used to us giving everything and saying yes all the time and never sort of speaking up, never sort of using our voice, never having a say. And they don't like it. And so there sometimes is backlash that happens. Yes, Lori, it's a reality. It's not always roses and sunshine. Wait, did you just say no? Seriously, you're not allowed to say no. You can't say no. But to know that they're not used to it yet. And this is new. So you've decided that having boundaries is good for you, but the rest of the people in your life aren't quite sure yet. They're not used to you acting this way yet. They're not used to this. You've all of a sudden started doing things differently, and they're not sure what to do with it. And so, oh, hey, my Harlow Gold, so nice to see you here. Yeah, those people are in the minority. It's often the people that are closest to us that are just sort of not sure if they're ready for this yet. They're not sure if they like it yet. And so sometimes they just need a chance to adapt to it. But to know that the guilt comes, big guilt trips will come when you start having boundaries, when you start saying no to things, when you start speaking up. There will be people who will try and use every trick in the book, guilt or criticism or name calling or whatever it is to get you back into how they want you to be. Someone with no boundaries, with no say, with no voice. So the next thing that can happen at the beginning when we start setting boundaries with people is the relationship will sometimes become less close. And that's just part of it. Because normally when we don't have very good boundaries, we feel that we're responsible for everybody else. We feel like everybody else's stuff is up to us, that we are responsible for everybody's feelings. We're responsible to make sure everybody is happy. We're responsible to make sure every single person and all their emotional stuff and everything about them is being dealt with or being taken care of by us. We feel responsible for them. We carry their stuff for them. We do their stuff for them. We are over functioning for them. I'm not the boss. Deal with your own crap. Exactly. Because the truth is we are not responsible for anyone. Yeah, guilty, right? And those of us who are people pleasers, who are people who love being in close relationships with people and love being really close, will have a tendency to do that. It comes from a good place. It comes from a good heart. But people pleasing, yeah, right? But we are not responsible for anybody else. We cannot be responsible for anybody's thoughts, anybody's feelings, anybody's beliefs, anybody's behaviors, anybody's lives. The only person we are actually responsible for, that we actually have that control over, is ourselves. The only persons whose emotions or thoughts or choices or actions or beliefs or behaviors that we actually have control over is our own. You are not wrong for setting boundaries. We're going to get to why it's all worth it. Stick with us. So we're not responsible for anybody else's stuff because we have no control over anybody else's stuff. But what we do, what our responsibility is to other people is exactly that. We are responsible to others. We are responsible to be kind, to be compassionate, to be respectful, to be open-minded, to be willing to learn. We're responsible to others. We're not responsible for them. So then what happens is when we start having those boundaries and we're not taking everybody's stuff on, when we're not feeling responsible for the well-being of every other person in our life and bending over backwards and running ourselves ragged, trying to make everybody happy and good and great and wonderful all the time, then sometimes the relationships have a little bit of distance. Because all of a sudden, I'm not that person over-functioning for everybody else. Is this including our kids? Yeah, it actually is including our kids. That we're not responsible. Well, see, that's a tricky one because we are more responsible for our children, for their well-being, for some of the choices that they make, but we are not really responsible to fully control everything about them. But that is a whole other scope for a whole other day. And when it comes to kids, that they do need to be able to have boundaries. Children do still need to be able to have boundaries. We need to teach children to have boundaries because if we don't teach them how to have boundaries when they're little, they're not going to have boundaries when they grow up. If we don't sometimes respect a child's no when they're younger, they're not going to be able to say no when they're older. It doesn't mean, yeah, it's a whole other scope, Lori. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean that we go along with a child. It's like if my child said no, then, okay, fine, I won't, you don't have to do that. Obviously, you're still the parent, but we need to be teaching children that boundaries are okay when they're young so that they have boundaries when they're older and they know that it's okay to say no. But when we stop over-functioning for everybody else, then sometimes the relationships have a little bit of distance because we're not that person that's over-functioning for everyone. Sometimes the relationships aren't as close at first. But then we learn how to relate to people, how to be close to people, how to have relationships with people that don't involve us being responsible for everything. We have to learn how to relate to people in a different way that isn't about me trying to always please and meet everybody else's needs and only be thinking about everybody else. So re-navigating through the relationship when we're not over functioning anymore. And sometimes the relationship does get a bit of distance as we're figuring that out. I forgot to ask, if this is jiving with your people, if this is something that's resonating with you, if you wouldn't mind sharing and inviting, that would be great. As we get on to number 3, people can always watch the replay. Thank you so much for inviting Jenny Loves Hugs. And Jess, thank you guys. And Leah and Lori and Leslie, thank you guys so much. That's really, really generous of you. Thank you. And Leisha. So the next one, and this is something that does happen sometimes when we have boundaries, is that it will actually push certain people away. It will actually make some people not want to be in a relationship with us when we have boundaries, when we use our voice. Thank you guys. Thank you, Amber, so much for sharing. Thank you. That it will make some people not want to be around us, that they won't like it. They won't like us when we speak up. They won't like us when we use our voice. They won't like us when we have a say. They won't like us when we start showing up and being a fully active member in the relationship with wants, needs, and preferences. And when that's the case, that just happened to you, Linda. Yeah. When that's the case, it's hard and it hurts. But if we look at it another way, if it's saying that this person doesn't want to be in a relationship with me when I have boundaries, it's almost like saying this person only wants to be in a relationship with me if I do and say and act how they want me to do and say and act all the time. And if that's the case, is this somebody that we really want to be close with? It's really saying, they don't want to be close to you if you have a voice. They only love you for your yes. They only love you when you go along with them. And that happens with a lot of parents. And we need to do a whole scope about differentiating and becoming our own human beings outside of the approval of our parents, which is a whole other scope and it's a whole other topic. That's a loaded one and it's a big one. But it's an important one. But most people will protest when we first start to have boundaries. They'll go through it kicking and screaming. They'll guilt us. They'll accuse us. They'll criticize us. But most people will get used to it. They will adapt. They will adjust. They will learn to love us and respect us with our boundaries. And although there are these three of the downsides of starting to have boundaries, about being someone who shows up and is fully present in their lives with who they are, it's worth it, because when we have boundaries, we have better self-esteem, we have better self-confidence, we like ourselves more when we can show up and be like, this is who I am and I count. My wants, needs, and desires count. We have less anxiety. Often a lack of boundaries can be a huge trigger for anxiety, because anxiety is about fear. It's about lack of control. It's about not feeling in control. And often when we're going into situations where we feel out of control because we don't feel like we can do anything or say anything or protest or just speak up in any way to be able to set a boundary, then we get even more anxious. When we don't feel like we're allowed to have a say, it triggers anxiety. It sounds like a family holiday, Jen. Anyone else can relate to this family stuff, the boundaries, by show of hands, or a yes, or a one, or whatever it is. Anybody else struggle with boundaries, with family? Yes, yes, yes. We're going to need to talk more about this one, because boundaries is a huge thing. Yeah, family, well, yeah, depending on the family, we don't get to choose our families, and sometimes it can be really, really tough. Linda, not anymore. Hey, Linda, you gallo, so nice to have you here. Don't even get me started, seriously. I know. We have healthier relationships when we have better boundaries, because people know who we are. We know who we are. We show up in our relationships. There's no piddling around. There's no walking on eggshells. Everything is just sort of open and in the open and clear. There's no tiptoeing around. That can often happen when we don't have boundaries, when we don't know where people stand, where we don't want to upset anyone, where we don't want to speak up, when we don't want to say anything. And I'm not talking about just showing up and being like, this is what I want, and this is what works for me, and it's all about me, and don't you dare cross my boundary. That's not it. Those are not healthy boundaries. But when we can say, I matter too, I count too, I'm a part of this. It's not all about me, Terry, but it's not never about me. And who I am and what I bring and what I want, what I need, what I desire is not the end of the story. It's not the only say, but it's part of the story. And when they stay angry because you set a boundary that you don't like, acknowledge it. It's okay to acknowledge it, and it's okay to call it out. It's okay to say, I get the feeling that me setting that boundary did not sit well with you. Can we talk about this? And sometimes we need to be able to have those conversations. Sometimes when people give the silent treatment, when people kind of push us away, it's because they want us to come close. They're waiting for us to come close. We're so funny as humans. When we want people to come close, we usually push them away by criticizing them, by insulting them, by ignoring them, by giving them the silent treatment. But what that means is I'm hurt. And I want you to come close because I don't want to be hurt. But I'm too scared to be vulnerable because I'm hurt. It takes a lot of courage to say I'm feeling hurt and that upset me or that boundary hurt me. Can we talk about it? Yeah, some people don't like it. Oh, and seriously, okay, so I forgot to give this little analogy, and this is one of my favorite analogies, what often happens in families. So I see this a lot as a therapist when I'm working with someone, and working on their stuff and making changes in their lives and they're showing up differently in life. And often families don't like it because this is how things function. This is how things work. It's functional in its dysfunction. Even if it's a super dysfunctional family, everyone knows their role. They know how to act. They know how to be in the dysfunction. So then if one person pulls out and starts doing things differently, the whole system goes into chaos because all of a sudden things aren't working the way that we need them to work. Things are not working the way that we expect them to work. Things are not going the way that we know them to go, and it makes everybody else anxious, which is why people really they protest when we start setting boundaries. They get upset because they're anxious, because they're scared, because you're switching things up on them and you're making changes to the whole dynamic and you're imposing changes. And none of us really like to have changes imposed on us. We're fine. It's fine if I'm the one that's going to make the changes. It's fine if, if I'm doing this stuff for me and it's good for me and it's healthy for me, so I'm going to make changes and it's great. But that impacts the system. And yeah, it impacts the system. And sometimes they don't like it. They're like, no, you can't make this change because this is impacting me and I didn't decide. But it doesn't mean that we still don't do it. It doesn't mean that we try and be gentle and gracious with it, but it doesn't mean, which is often why people just get pulled back into the system. Hi, Timotheus. It's oftentimes when people are like, oh, forget it. I'm just not going to have boundaries. It's just too hard. I just can't deal with it. So I'll have boundaries in this area, but I just can't have boundaries with my family, and I'll just see them less because it's just too crazy. Yeah, a lot of people rely on Prozac and Valium to get through the holidays, not condoning it. But to stay the course, that sometimes to know that it takes people a little while to adapt to our new way of being. We've messed with the system. We've messed with their functional dysfunction. We're becoming more functional and they don't know what to do with it. To be patient, to be compassionate, and to stay the course because it is worth it. Yeah, it lived without boundaries. Yes, Jess condones having boundaries all the way. Am I allowed to say Jess? Jess is one of my star students. And from our boundary setting course. I think a few of them are in here. Yes, it's totally worth it. And even those of us who think we have boundaries, often they could use some work. I teach boundaries, and there's still times where I'm like, okay, this area needs a little bit of boundaries work. Doesn't mean it's all about me. It doesn't mean I'm rigid or difficult or ungenerous or not giving or selfish. That's not what boundaries mean. It just means that I count too. And that's okay. Thank you guys for being here. If you haven't already, join us on goodformegroup.com, my private Facebook group. An incredible, okay, I'm not going to say incredible group of people because sometimes that intimidates people. They're like, well, I'm not incredible, so I can't join your Facebook group, but you are incredible. So please join our Facebook group because there are some really deep, beautiful, amazing people in there. Have I ever done an anxiety course? Amber, it's on the list. It is on the list. But often when we have a deeper sense of self-confidence and good boundaries, automatically our anxiety goes down. When we know who we are and know where we stand and know what makes sense for us and feel like we have some control over who we are in our lives, then often our anxiety goes down. Just happens. I'm so glad you're in our Facebook group. I hope you guys are having a good Monday. And yes, awesome. Amber, I'm loving having you in the confidence course. Yes, well, let's talk about it. I definitely am open to that. Speaking of, in our group, in our Good For Me group, I'm going to be putting out just a call to you guys who are in the group for topics that you want me to scope on. The stuff that connects most with you, because this is for you guys. So to let me know, I'll maybe put that in the group tomorrow, and you guys can just give me a rundown of what you want me to talk about. Yay! I hope you guys are having a great Monday. Thanks for being here. Take good care. Goodformegroup.com. Thank you, Carrie.